Okay, we're ready to go.
Good evening, Millis. I'm Lori Barnes. I'm the chair of the Millis Select Board. It is the meeting of Monday, May 18th. I want to welcome everybody from the community and, of course, those people who serve as volunteers in any official capacity, notably my colleagues, Mr. McCaffrey, who will be joining us, and Mr. Germain. With us also is our town administrator, Michael Gazinski, and our director of operations, Karen Beret. This is a truncated agenda, and it will be a highly disciplined meeting, owing to the fact that I think everybody whose face I'm looking at right now has justifiable reason to suffer from some level of Zoomitis. So I think what we will do is we're going to be very disciplined in our approach. The subject areas of this agenda are exclusive to the fiscal 21 budget, as well as a preliminary recommendation of lists that spring town meeting warrant. I want to, as by way of background, say a couple of things. First of all, any and all department heads who issued concerns about the select board's prior decision to demonstrate some fiscal responsibility and admittedly some prognostication by reducing our operating budget against a loss of 5% of income to the town through whatever means. That budget those concerns have been registered and they are formally on the record, so nobody tonight should feel any obligation to restate what's already there, and in the interest of time, we would ask that contributions in fact be new. I also want to say, with respect to the current emergency management situation, that for those of you who may have missed it, the governor did today issue more details about the rollout of a 4-phased reopening of the economy, if you will. The information about that has been posted to the town website. To the extent that further details are provided through and to the business and employer community, that will be coordinated with members of the local emergency management agency, and specifically with leads by Bob Weiss as our Director of Economic Development and John McVeigh, our Director of the Board of Health. So I simply wanted to acknowledge the fact that we are aware that when the state makes this announcement that there is an impact at the local level, and I want everybody to know that 3 weeks ago, I believe the Select Board actually gave agreement to the start of a reopening task force as an independent entity working tangential to the Economic Development Committee, and that group will have its second Zoom call tomorrow, and that work is ongoing. So I think you will see some local implementations of the governor's return to a full economy being played out. Does anybody have any questions about that before we move to the budget? I am going to ask also, we'll try very hard to be judicious about including people. Please feel free to raise your hand using the mechanism on Zoom. I will try and keep my eyes peeled for anybody who wants to ask a question, and we'll try and remember to do so. So if you are omitted, that is not intentional. At this point, what we're going to do is we're going to ask the town administrator to go over what essentially are the key elements of the fiscal 21 budget as would reflect the contraction of 5%. And to the extent that anybody has a comment or concern from this board or beyond, this would be the forum to ask those. It's a fairly straightforward approach to cost containment. And what we would like to do is fulfill our obligation to the town and to the Finance Committee by rendering any opinion that can be passed forward. So with that, I'm going to ask the town administrator to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And in keeping in line with your comments, I am going to kind of just quickly go through this. Most of this information is repetitive to the board members from prior meetings. I did submit the following information in your meeting packet: an updated FY21 budget summary, memos from several department heads relating to the impacts of the budget cuts or adjustments, an updated proposed personnel plan schedule, the final capital planning committee report and recommendations, a memo from the fire chief regarding the SAFER grant, a draft annual town meeting warrant for the board's review and discussion, and information related to the federal state CARES Act. So basically the budget summary, which you have in your packets, reflects a 5% reduction in estimated revenues and local aid and local receipts for fiscal year 21. The budget, as presented, maintains a 10% reduction in salaries and wages for all departments in the Veterans Memorial Building, with the exception of the Board of Health and the DPW. And as has been stated at prior meetings, this is to be accomplished through the elimination of Friday hours at the DMV. The finance director and I have met with all affected department heads, so they understand the impacts of this proposed change. The Council on Aging is proposing the elimination of a position of department assistant and the redistribution of that department's workload. This would allow the COA to be open 8 hours per day, Monday through Thursday. As I mentioned, there are memos in your packet from the treasurer collector and the assessor discussing some anticipated impacts from the reduction in weekly staff hours. And as I mentioned before, one way to possibly counteract some of those negative impacts for the workload of the employees would be to consider the closing of the DMV on another day of the week to allow staff to try to keep up with that workload. As I mentioned in your packet, is a proposed personnel plan. That proposed personnel plan increases the wages of the 3 full-time staff. There's only 3 full-time staff that are covered by the plan. That increases them by the same percentage as most union contracts, which is 2.5%. And the net result would be an increase of approximately $4,000 in cost to the general fund, which is already included in the budget you have. The building commissioner, as part of the personnel plan, has recommended a reduction in the yearly stipends of a number of inspectors in the department, which is also reflected in the document. As I had mentioned, the capital planning committee's recommendation is unchanged since the finance committee's meeting this past Wednesday, and certainly the board can discuss that if you have any questions or concerns in regards to that. And we do have information again in your packet in regards to the SAFER grant. And again, if the board wants to discuss that, we certainly can. So I don't know, Madam Chair, if you want me to delve into the town meeting warrant or you want to talk a little bit about the budget at this time. The other issue in the budget that I want to just touch upon, which did cause some discussion with the Finance Committee, was in regards to the HCA funds, which we have collected, but we can't utilize until the fall town meeting, so they've been certified as free cash. And we have identified $95,000 in costs related to the police department. That would be the marijuana stipends as well as the resource officer. The funding of those items has been deferred to the fall town meeting. It was suggested by a member of the Finance Committee that it may be best to utilize stabilization at the spring town meeting to fund that and then reimburse stabilization at the fall. Either way gets you where I'm hoping for us to go, but it's more of maybe a perception issue on how it's presented to the public. So that may be an item the board would want to discuss. That's really all I have as a summary of the budget. I know the library we had met with them today, and they forwarded some plans for how they would carry out the 5% reduction in their budget. It's my understanding that there was discussion with the director and some of the trustees in regards to the best way to move that forward. And certainly I'm sure they'd be willing to answer any questions the board has in regards to that. So without going on and on, that's the brief summary of where we're at in regards to the budget proposal. And with that, it is a balanced budget based on a 5% reduction in certain revenues.
What I'd like to do is, I'd like to bifurcate the meeting this separate from the town meeting warrant, and invite first the select board, and I'll take a stab at the start, to ask specific budget questions that have arisen. We all participated in the posted finance committee meeting last week, and there's another one on Wednesday. So I think that's probably the piece of information that's going to be most helpful to the group to which this process is connected. So on the basis of that, I'd like to move that conversation forward and then see if we can get ourselves even potentially to a motion to accept the town administrator's budget recommendation after any comments. I had two specific questions. One, and I think I raised both during the finance committee. One is with respect to the capital plan recommendation for the DPW radio system. I just want to say, as background to anybody who wasn't on FinCom, the capital planning group's process was really rigorous and very dispassionate, which we needed both. And one of the things that did not make the grade was the DPW radio system, which for my own peace of mind and my own belief is that it's very safety driven, and that we as a town cannot obligate people who are digging in the muck or worse to be carrying their $1,000 iPhones and be expected to be on call for an emergency. That the point of the radio system was to provide a mono frequency method of communication for a lot of the work, for all of their work, but also specific to times of emergency. So the question with that background comment, for whomever can answer it, is we are going to have a surplus in the snow and ice budget, which is unprecedented, and we have this one-time spending need. My question is there a way to apply and transfer, and I know it's in different accounts, the snow and ice budget surplus, and then to potentially even rebid this radio program, because potentially in the current economy, the costs of acquiring it may in fact have been reduced? Is there another solution so that we can move this from the not to be funded, but more assuredly funded? And I'm not sure to whom that conversation goes. I don't know if it's to the director of the DPW or the acting director of IT or to the town administrator. So whoever can field it, feel free.
Well, I would, Madam Chair, I could certainly defer the technical specifics of the possible use of snow and ice in this fiscal year towards the purchase of radios in next fiscal year. But what I would say is that if the select board determines in their judgment that the need for the radios is significant enough to act now, then certainly I would work with the finance director and the DPW director to find a mechanism to make that happen. As you might be aware, the cost of the radios system is approximately $55,000. And divided between the water enterprise, sewer enterprise, and general fund, it's about $18,300 per funding source. I am aware that the water and sewer enterprise does have the available funds for that. The general fund, that we would have to get creative and really start digging into the budgets to find those funds. I'm not saying it's not possible. If we work hard at it, we can probably, and if it's a priority of the board, we can find those funds. Having said that, I guess Carol's on the line if she has any comments about the use of the snow and ice for this project, for purchase of this equipment in FY21.
It was my understanding at the finance committee meeting last week that the finance policy was, if there was a surplus in the snow and ice, that money would be used to purchase pre-purchase salt for the coming year, so that they would be able to build up the salt shed. If that doesn't happen and we do have a surplus in the snow and ice after we try to balance the remaining part of this year, that would fall to free cash, and then that would be a vote after the free cash is certified in the fall by the capital committee as to what should be purchased at that time.
So Madam Chair, if I may, I would say that if it's the wish of the board to move ahead at this time, I can work with the finance director and the DPW director to find those funds. The snow and ice might not be the best approach to it, but we could certainly work to find those funds for FY21 if that's a priority of the board, and putting that forward as part of the article at town meeting.
Okay, I have one more question, and I'm going to go to my colleagues. This is specific to the library. I know in budget presentations in the past, and with the benefit of, I believe, some consultant reports, one of the things we heard from the advocates, including the trustees, was the desire to have standardized operational hours, and that we create some confusion when those hours are different day to day. So the question I actually had asked was whether or not, as part of cost containment, we could look potentially at acting the way that society is accustomed with respect to, say, restaurants, and that is to replace the 10 hours of operating time on Mondays and instead extend the operating hours on Thursday, which would be a net savings of 6 operating hours per week, but it would accomplish a standardization of operating time Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to an 8 o'clock close, which we also heard during budget presentations was desired. And I'm just wondering if somebody can comment on that.
Madam Chair, I from this would be a policy approach from the Library Board of Trustees and the director. I believe the director is on the Zoom meeting if she would like to comment, but I would refer the particulars of that to the director and the trustees.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to speak a little bit to that. This is Kim Tolson, Library.
Please do.
So we did, I along with the Board of Trustees, we looked at a lot of different options for how to reconfigure the hours in order to meet the reduction that's required in personnel. And the Thursday hours, because it's just kind of a matter of how our staffing works, because we have a small staff. And those longer days require 2 shifts of people. So that would require bringing in at least 2 additional people on Thursdays to be able to staff those evening hours. And we're looking at trying to keep our Saturday hours open for those who are unable to get to the library during the week. We thought it was important to have some weekend hours. So in order to staff those with our regular core staff hours, it's not really feasible for us to look at Thursday hours with the limitations we have right now with the budget.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that that they're not interchangeable. Monday time and Thursday time is a truncation of Monday and an extension of Thursday are not interchangeable. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask my colleagues, Mr. McCaffrey, I'll start with you with any questions that you might have for the town administrator's budget recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. My first question is whether or not it's possible for us to put up on the screen the actual budget proposal. I certainly want to talk about some line items, but I got the general picture, but I think it's important for us to be able to work through the line items if we have any comments. Otherwise, they will be sort of out of context. I'm just wondering if that's possible.
I'd have to ask Karen if that's possible to put on the computer at this point.
I would. I can I'll have to go to my email and try to pull it up, or if you can send me what you're looking to do, Mike, because I don't have it on this computer. I have the email. Do you want what was in the packet? Is what you're looking for?
Well, we have an email with the overarching and the big picture recommendations. We also have, 8 or 9 pages of actual budget line items.
Yeah, if you can quickly email that to me exactly how you want it to be shown on the screen, I can do that.
Karen, I can share my screen if you want me to co-host. If you want to name me a co-host, I can just push
yeah, if you have it available. I'm sorry, it's tough because I'm not on my actual computer when I run this. So hold on a minute. I'm going to share it with Lori. If you've got it right there, Lori,
I
that's the easiest.
have it from the handout, I think.
Yeah.
It's from the packet. All right, hang on.
All right.
Everybody be patient with the technology.
Yeah,
I'm
dear.
sure-
I'm not-
Sorry,
I
people.
think it would be helpful if we could. And of course, I could figure out how to turn off my printer. Then there wouldn't be any.
Yeah, there we go. Loring pulled it right up.
Okay, good.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you see it,
Jim, you tell me where you want me to go.
Well, we have the first, this is this page 1 here. Sort of scroll down to the next page too, which is the general government line item. So I guess big picture is the general government line item has basically, when you take out of it benefits and insurance. I'll take any coaching I could get from somebody who could tell me how to turn off a printer. I think somehow the Massachusetts state government has sent a message to my computer to print all the COVID-19 handouts. I can't figure out how to stop it.
Jim, as a former IT professional, you can always yank the plug out of the wall.
It don't
Yeah.
plug out.
There's
That's
that.
exactly what I was going to say to him.
That was going to be my answer as well.
Sorry about that. The dog ate my homework, so I never have a dog.
Jim, am I on the correct page for you?
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, the bottom line in this is that the big items that we see cuts on, in terms of the prior recommendation, I just want to make sure I understand what they are. For example, town buildings, there's a big reduction there from the original recommendation. So that is, I believe, a
That is,
reduction.
yes, there's a payroll reduction there, and we've eliminated one of the facilities managers' positions, so that has reduced it as well.
Okay.
And it's also part of the 10% across the board municipal center reduction.
Okay. So, and then there's an increase in registrars and elections because we're going to have 4 elections or 3, whatever the number is. We're going to have many more elections this year in a national election.
Right.
Well, there's actually an increase there, but that's because we have more work to do. We have to let people vote. Okay. Next question is with respect to the requested scenario of a 10% reduction in hours, which translates into a 10% reduction in pay. Those salary reductions are already in these numbers, right?
That's correct. On the column that lists the FY21 5%. Proposed budget. Those are the numbers for that are being presented for consideration tonight.
Okay.
So specifically the purple field, correct?
Yes, the FY21 5% TA proposed budget, and then you see the variance, from the original proposed budget that did not include the 5% reduction right next to it.
So if I go back to the prior page and I see the selectman's office, that builds into the number a 10% reduction in hours and pay for everyone in the selectman's office.
That's correct.
Same is the case with the finance director and the assessor and et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's correct.
Now, the IT number, of course, we've taken out the director and we've added significant amount of money to expenses. That's for a contract that we need to have to keep the system running. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's a different way of doing the same job, and it's going to end up costing us more money. I think it even cost more than last year, but okay. I just want to understand it. I would also propose that we look to reduce the town council by 10%. Our employees are being asked to reduce their salaries. I would ask that we consider a reduction in the town councils by $9,000. The implications of that, of course, we have a large amount of our services are covered by a retainer. These fees here are the out of scope. The difference between is it 70 or 75? I can't remember.
The $72,000 per year is our retainer.
Okay, so we've got a bunch of money, not a bunch, a wise budget for stuff that is out of scope. I think we need to manage this out of scope work much more closely, and put a protocol in place that, everybody understands what's in the the retainer, and B, everybody understands that we're just aren't going to pick up the phone and call town council without going through a little double check to make sure it's something that we really need. So I would look to, and this is just my recommendation on this line item, to reduce that line item by $9,000.
Okay.
I mean, this is not a decision. This is my request for consideration. And could you go to the next page? Because I was trying to cover all of the general government. I've already talked about town buildings. I think I understand the other numbers here pretty well, pretty much flat. And so the next page is the final line item, general government. We can see that it's just for purposes of conversation. Last year, the town adopted a final general government line item budget of $7.42 million. What we're proposing today under the town administrator 5% is a $7.828 million. If I have the numbers right. I think I do. But almost all of that is because of the benefit costs and the insurance cost, if I'm not mistaken. So that definitely is a pretty flat budget, and it's pretty much it's not a level service budget. It's a service cutback budget, and the so-called uncontrollable costs are going up. I forget how much they went up year over year. I think it's almost $400,000. So anyway, long story short is this. If I'm willing to support this, I think I understand the consequences of it. I think I understand the open hours and whatnot. I just am not comfortable in total at the end of the day without making an adjustment in town council.
May I make a quick comment on something here?
Yep, you are next up unless Mr. McCaffrey has any other questions.
Oh, I didn't mean to intrude on Mr. McCaffrey.
Does Mr. McCaffrey have any other questions, and has he solved his printer problem?
Nothing on the general government line.
Okay, Mr. Jermaine.
My comment on that, I wanted to go back. I hate to defend it, but the IT, don't look at that so much as an increase. We have done a lot of consolidation between departments in the town, and we've changed the way we're doing our business. We had major upgrades to the system this year that, had they been done in town the normal way with purchasing equipment, purchasing software and everything, we would have seen a very significant bump that we'd have had to make in that budget. So, in fact, we've managed to keep it somewhat under control because we're flattening it out, if you will, over a number of years. But we're going to have ongoing costs as a result of that. So, what we have given up at the moment is someone to come in and become the IT director. And I'm going to say, don't keep looking at me. That's why we have some other companies involved, and they are going to begin to assume some of that most of that responsibility. But their costs we've written into the contract, we hope will be pretty well contained in this. So that actually probably is going to be considered less of a budget increase than it would have been had we not done what we did this year.
And Madam Chair, I'll support that by just saying that, as part of the new approach to our IT system, we will no longer have a lot of the large capital costs of new servers and items like that moving forward. We'll just have the annual operating budgets, and will allow us to stay at the cutting edge of IT. And I think the board's aware of all the improvements that have been made to the IT system here, but it's really an adjustment getting away from capital costs of new servers every so many years to a really cutting-edge IT system where we're in the cloud. So, and I can assure you that if you look at many other towns around here, our budget is much smaller than those towns.
Absolutely. Mr. Jermaine, do you have any other questions for the town administrator or comments?
No, not at this time. I have comments and questions when we are ready to go through other portions of the budget, but I'll let the budget continue to be reviewed at this point.
Okay, so Mr. Gazinski, is there anything else specific to that comment that you want me to scroll to that would illustrate an important change or something to bring to the attention of the community?
I don't have any other specific line items that I haven't touched upon in my narrative, unless there are specific areas that the board would like to discuss. And the town council items, we can move forward with. That's one of those items that it's really hard to estimate. It really depends on what happens during the year, and if there are incidents or situations that require additional town council that we're not aware of at this time. So it's certainly a doable goal to stay within that budget line item, assuming we don't have too many unanticipated issues come up.
Before I move and open this conversation to everybody, I just want to make sure that I've covered the waterfront here with respect to my colleagues. If there are other specific budget questions that you would like addressed, and I'll start.
Yes, yeah, Madam Chair, I'd like to go to line item number 2, which is public safety.
Somebody steer me in the right direction.
Go up, go north.
Oh, public safety, here we are.
The public safety line item.
Yep.
So that we understand here. Okay, this is, if I'm not mistaken, around a 4.7% increase year over year from 2020. So this budget, which is reduced from what was asked for, still is an increase because of increases in pay and whatnot for various folks in public service, in the public safety. I want to be sure I understand where the proposed action for crossing guards is. Is it in this line item here?
Yes, that's in. It would be in police salaries.
So scroll up to the prior page. So, but that's already built into it?
Yes, the reduction of the crossing guards, or the elimination of the crossing guards is already built into that.
Yeah. I know we've talked about it, and I'd like to ask if we have given any thought to some kind of a transition here. I know that the proposal was to buy the new signs and eliminate the crossing guards. I have some concern that there's no transition at all built into that. Would we be better served by putting some, I would call it guards or whomever, for the first month or two of this operation, so that we can be sure that the children, who are the ones that are going to be at risk here, are adequately safeguarded? It just seems to me dropping this, I'll call it cold turkey, is not the right way to transition to a new crossing system.
I'm going to defer to the chief, who is on the line, to see if he can respond to that.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. In regards to the crossing guards, as you know, last year I had brought this to the board's attention. We've been advertising the position for, 3 years now and no applicants. And we just had one resign, so now we're down to 3. In terms of transitioning to the signals, we could absolutely. When I spoke to the superintendent, I'd made a suggestion that we staff the officers that are working in the area to conduct crosswalk enforcement while the kids are crossing and utilizing the system. In terms of people to fall back on, we don't have any crossing guards other than those 3. So, I would leave it to Mr. Gazinski and yourselves to see if that would be possible to keep them, if that's what you guys would like. The crosswalk signals are great. Currently we cover those crosswalks only 15 hours a week. And, the notion of just dropping the crossing guards with no plan, and I've heard that, that's not exactly the case. We've opted to go and utilize technology for the betterment of all residents. You know, these signals are used every day, could be used 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it would provide coverage throughout the summer, weekends, after school, and the maintenance is very minimal to these devices. You're talking maintenance to the battery system once every 3 years. So.
Well, Madam Chair, I wasn't questioning whether or not we should move to the new system. I was questioning how we're going to do it, and if there is any value from a public safety point of view to having, I'll call it an overlapping period. Now, let me ask just to get clarification though, in terms of understanding how these folks are paid. I assume that they're not paid over the summertime because they're not providing the service. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. They're paid during the school year. So I could meet with the chief and we could discuss, whether it be a 4-week, 6-week, 8-week transition program to see if it's possible for us to either bring a few of the crossing guards back if they're still available for a period of time in the fall, or to try to come up with some other solution if that's not possible. And we could come up with some approximate budget numbers to accommodate for that. I'm sure we could supply that within the next week, and come up with at least some estimated numbers of what it would take in order to have that transition put in place.
Well, I'm not suggesting that is the solution. I'm asking if there is, either from an operational point of view or a budget point of view, some intervention for transition that would provide an additional level of safety as we enter into the new program. And it's not about the times when the children are not going to school. It's about the children when they're going to school, and what will we be able to do to make sure that they're safe using this new technology. Now, if the answer is deploying some of the police officers during this early period, I'm okay with that, except it then, stretches resources somewhat thin. Or if there is some way for a month or two to transition through the crossing guards, that may be reasonable, or it may not be. This is just a budget exercise at this point. What I have here is a budget that provides, on its face, and maybe I'm wrong, no human element of transition. It's just the signs go up, and assuming the school actually opens, and that's something we hope for in September, that the children will just easily adapt to that new safety system, and everything will be fine. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that. So if someone, whether the school department or the chief or together, can explain how we're going to cover, let's say, the first month, so that we're confident that everybody knows how this is going to work, I think I would be more comfortable. And if it has a budget implication, now's the time to address it.
I would ask the chief, is there a way for some coverage to be accomplished by other officers in the short term to achieve that transition? It feels to me like with the cessation of school, the expectation of things being new and different will already have been established, and maybe the transition isn't going to be as abrupt. But I would defer to you as the expert.
So when school starts, obviously we have officers on the day shift, and depending on the staffing for the day, we could help supplement some of those locations. The idea of having a police officer in those areas, to me, would be more beneficial than the crossing guards at that point, only because they'll be able to enforce Chapter 90 laws by writing tickets or citations to anybody in the area while the children are getting familiar with the new devices. And if they're not available and we're short-staffed, then we would have to bring some individuals in on overtime.
Okay, that was just my question, and so if we approve this budget recommendation, then the police department is going to have to cover the transition, whatever transition plan, out of the existing force, and we would not have crossing guards. I mean, I'm not saying yes or no, I'm saying that's what we're deciding at this point.
I think that's correct. Is that correct, Mr. Town Administrator?
That is correct. This budget does not have special funds in it for a transition at this time.
Are there other line items, Mr. McCaffrey, you would like me to move to?
From public safety, what I was hoping to do is, ask if there's any comments on each line item. Not necessarily, and I don't know whether Mr. Germain has comments or you have comments.
I do have a comment, if it's possible.
Please feel free.
My comment has to do with just an observation I think those who are listening should be aware of. The Tri-County School, you'll notice, is the one line item over which we have absolutely no control. It's gone up $241,000 since the 2020 budget. It's important to recognize that that's a very significant amount of money that we're spending each year. That's bad. I'm not commenting in that regard, but it's one line item over which, if it goes up, we have absolutely no control over it. It has to do with the way in which it's funded. So be aware that we're spending $1 million this coming year based on the way they calculate it from prior years in the Tri-County.
Do you have other comments or questions, Mr. Germain?
So this is you're talking about line item number 3 now.
That's line item number 3.
Yeah.
I happen to agree with my colleague on public safety, but I also agree with the chief. I think the best way to deal with that is if he can place officers in the area during that period of transition. Let's face it, the drivers certainly pay more attention to an officer than they do to others. And the fact that they can write a ticket drives the whole issue home very quickly.
Okay, well, in terms of the school budget, I'm assuming that at this point the school line item is a number that has been communicated to the school department. They are working on seeing what kind of plan they can come up with to try and reach that number. And so I don't know where we stand on that, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm hoping that they're going to be able to find a way to get to this number, because otherwise we'll have a lot more trouble than I thought. But anyway, and I don't know if we've heard any communication from the school folks or it's premature.
Madam Chair?
Please.
I would just say that we have communicated the 5 and 10% reduction numbers, revenue reduction numbers to the school administration, and they are aware that the board is moving forward on the 5% revenue reduction model, and they are aware of what those numbers are, and that the finance director and I are meeting with the school administration tomorrow, so we'll be following up on these discussions as well. Okay,
I'd also like to just add a comment in terms of the earlier discussion of Tri-County as the only, sort of we have no control. I only wish that were the case. We have no control over state aid. We have no control over the charges that we get from a whole variety of places. This happens to be a large one, and I would argue that the way this should be analyzed, frankly, is that line items 3 and 4 are the cost of public education for the residents of our town. So I know it comes as a separate line item. I know the folks are going to a different school. We also have folks going to Norfolk Aggie. We also have folks going to Choice In and Choice Out. So it is a big number, but it's because enough Millis students decided that the best education that they could get from a public education for the next 4 years from the Tri-County School. So that's doesn't mean it's any easier to to foot the bill, but that's the reality of it. And it's, from my perspective, unless we change the strategy of how we're going to deliver that kind of service, this is a number that will vary based upon the choices that parents and children make just to where they want to get a high school education.
I'm not overly concerned on that regard. What I am concerned with is the disparity in the amount that we are charged versus our costs per student. And that difference is significant for us. It's one that I have discussed with our state reps. They are, let's say, weren't overly aware of it before, and I'm not sure anything can be done about it, at least certainly not in the near term. My overall feeling is much like what you just described, which is we have to have those options available. It's part of the educational process, but they ought to be on parity with what the medians for the schools throughout the state are paying on the cost per child. And turns out there are several discrepancies in how that was accounted for, which is why the number tends to grow fairly significantly each year. And that's something they've said they will look into, but who knows when it'll happen. Regardless, it is a number that we will deal with, and it is part of the cost that we should be paying for the education of our children. That's not even an issue, but we need to get it in parity.
Mr. Germain, did you have other comments or questions to ask?
Not on these specific items. I have some a little later when we get to some of the enterprise funds, but I will defer until then.
Mr. Kaczynski, I was asked about planning board and specifically administrative support. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on the amount of administrative support that, say, the planning board receives vis-a-vis the other offices, to include the town administrators who require fairly intensive administrative operations support in the course of the year. The planning board meets, I think, once monthly, but maybe somebody else can comment on that.
Well, Madam Chair, what I would say that is the support, the regular support for that has been adjusted 10% downwards based on the VMB across the board. I'm not sure if there's a specific question in regards to that.
I think it was one of time required in terms of just man hours, time.
I'm sorry, you've lost me. I'm not sure what you mean.
A calculation on the basis of how much time is required for one board, the administrative support for one board.
Well, I'd have to look at that specific case if there's questions about whether or not there's too much or too little support for certain boards or committees. I'd certainly be willing to go and take a look at that and study an issue on that if there's specific concerns as to whether a certain board or committee is either getting too much or too little support. Certainly the reduction of 10% of the hours here is going to stretch many of the departments quite seriously, and I'm sure that from the perspective of the boards and committees that are supported, that would be no different. But I'd certainly be willing to take a look at it if there's specific questions about it.
Okay, great. So do you want us, Mr. Town Administrator, to give you some sort of feedback? Yep.
Can we go back to the DPW line item, please?
Sorry, tell me where I'm headed. What line? What page? I can't scroll and look. Registrar Zoning Board.
Right after polls.
Am I near it?
Keep going.
There you go.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you. You have the floor, Mr. McCall.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So this proposal is to the 10% reduction doesn't apply to the DPW staff in the town office. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that includes both the director and staff.
That's correct.
Okay. And does this budget call for the summer help to go through to September?
Yes, there's $15,000 for summer help to maintain public areas, cut grass, maintain other public areas throughout the summertime.
Well, my view on that is that that's something we should not include in the budget. I mean, at this point, I know it's not adding staff really because it's the same staffing level we had last year. But my concern here is that we're taking on summer help while we're asking everybody else to do more with less. And it's no reflection on the department. It's no reflection on the individuals. It's just a matter of, is there a priority here where we say, for this purpose, we've told the young gentlemen who are coming to work that it's highly likely that we have to review it in June 30th. I mean, I'd like to understand what it would cost us even if we reduce the hours to half-time in the summertime rather than full-time.
Could I ask the DPW director to respond to Mr. McCaffrey's question?
Sure, thank you. So I think that what we're missing from FY20 to FY21, the DPW is already missing or reduced 8.52%. There's already been a reduction. At the printout that I gave you, that's in, when I gave you the consequences of what those budget reductions are. I mean, I would, for highlighting, tree care, we're reducing to $15,000. Traffic lines, we're reducing from 30 to 20. And we won't get into the consequences. I mean, we're going to shut lights off on Route 109 on July 1st. All the ornamental lights will be turned off on Route 109. Traffic lines, crosswalks that we're talking about eliminating crossing guards and that will be painted every other year because the funding just is not there. We're reducing road maintenance 25% for filling potholes. There's only $20,000 there, so we're reducing it down to $15,000. And the most important one is the gasoline. I don't know how we can reduce, and I think everybody's looking at that. I mean, we just signed a contract for that. But, and also, I mean, part of this package, I did send the town administrator, what would happen if we lose the summer help? I mean, Oak Grove Farm, we would not cut the grass there any longer because we just wouldn't be able to do it. The town field and the lower field at the town park, at the Clyde Brown, those grasses would not be cut. We would have to reduce, we also pay to have the grass cut at the police station. That would not be able to be done. And I honestly don't think we'd be able to cut the grass even at the town hall. It's a long list of grass cutting that we do and maintain. I did send it to the town administrator. I didn't see it as part of the package. And it would also reduce a lot of work that we're hoping that the DPW staff can do to cut the costs at the new facility that's going to be built. That will have to be looked at. I don't know when that's going to happen, if we're even, that hasn't even gone out to bid yet. But so I mean, that's what would happen. I mean, if we do it, cut it, even if we cut it in half. We have, we did not fill 2 positions. I did ask for 2 appointees. One of the gentlemen got a job someplace else, so he turned it down. So I've only gone through with 1 person so far, and I was hoping to keep that probably for the rest of the summer. So I mean, it's not a safety issue about cutting grass. So yes, I think if that's what the board is looking at to do, then I just think that everybody would have to cut back on cemetery. How the cemeteries maintained, because they also go up there and help do that. We just went through a whole study of people not doing, working out of their zone of stormwater, water, and sewer. How are we going to keep track of that? I mean, right now, we have people outside fixing for Memorial Day, and they're all out of water and sewer funds. All 3 of them are paid out of water and sewer funds. So I don't know how else I can explain it. I think there's more pressing issues of cutting electricity, traffic lines, tree care, and road maintenance, physical exams, equipment hired, and engineering services. I would hope everybody would take a look at that. But I know everybody's losing stuff, and I'm just trying to work within what I was given from the town administrator and the finance director to make this work.
Madam Chair, and as I said, I would, the 15,000 that was left in there, I mean, it was based on the concerns that the DPW director provided me, that certainly the board can weigh in its discussions. And just to note that the comments from the DPW director were in your packet from your last meeting, so I didn't add it again to this meeting, but you did receive those.
Well, yeah, and I appreciate the comments from Mr. McKay, and I'm not trying to, anything other than this is a hard decision for everybody. It's just, I'm asking the question from the board's point of view as to whether the board wants to fund some summer help, and if we don't do it, we don't fund it, then the grass will not be cut. So a service will be eliminated. I'm not advocating it, I'm just bringing it up for conversation because it seems to me we had this conversation when we appointed these gentlemen at our last meeting with the notion that they would have to be cognizant of the fact that they may not have a position after June 30th. This is the time where we decide whether they will or not, because we'll appropriate the money or we won't. I mean, so it's a time for us to follow up, that's all, and make a decision.
My concern goes along your lines, Mr. McCaffrey, and that is we're asking all the other departments to cut in some way or another. The library has to cut, which means some of the hours aren't going to be there, people aren't going to be served the way they might like, and the way they expect to be served. We're cutting in other areas. Perhaps it's more perception, but I think it's important that we go through the departments with an even hand, which I think is what you're getting at. Excuse me. And I'm not particularly keen on not seeing grass cut or whatever it ends up being that isn't done, but that's part of the cost of cutting budgets at this point, and that's what we as a town have to take into consideration when we all make these difficult decisions. It's not just us. We make the recommendations, but they have to go through and get approved ultimately at town meeting. And so the residents are going to make those final decisions. They'll either agree with us or not agree with us. But we have to make our recommendation, and I think it has to be an even-handed recommendation throughout the budget process. So that's my view of it at any rate.
Well, Madam Chair, what I would ask is that just the town administrator and the director, give us the number, and doesn't necessarily get decided this evening. And I know it's not a big number, but it is something that I would like us to consider, and we may well decide that the value of the service exceeds the value we get somewhere else by saving some money here. And I'm not suggesting that no one likes this, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think there's another way of also looking at it. I was willing to see us give up an IT director for the town, which on the trade-off, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Kaczynski, ended up being on the order of $20,000 or $25,000. Again, as the numbers go, it's not a very large number, but you keep adding up not very large numbers, and ultimately you have a large number. Or, as to paraphrase, I think it was Everett Dirksen, who probably many of you don't even know, you cut $1 billion here and $1 billion there, and pretty soon you have real money you're talking about. And it's the same kind of concept we're dealing with here.
Mr. McKay, did you want to respond at all?
I just wanted to, it's not like the DPW already hasn't cut. There's been $35,000 that's been cut from the FY19 budget, 20 budget to the FY21 budget. That's already been cut, no matter before any of these discussions have even started. In FY 19 going into 20, there was almost $70-something thousand cut from the expense line item budget. And again, if that's the decision, and that's why in the report I asked that the approval of the board. So when we shut off the street lights and people's potholes are getting, and I get it. I'm just letting you know what has to be cut because the funds just aren't there. Then, and the grass isn't cut for baseball games that are going to just start up, probably around July 1st. I get it. As long as I have your support, people call up. That's what we're going to give them.
And I would just say that I did, as well as the finance director, we did look at all the departments, and there have been cuts across the board, including the DPW. The DPW was focused mainly on the expense line items, which have their own effect on operations, certainly, as been outlined by the director. But within the VMB, there's simply not, the expense lines simply aren't there, and that's why we looked at an across-the-board reduction. And again, the board had indicated you wanted to not focus on public safety and public works for the 5% round of cuts. But in the original adjustment for the original budget proposal, based on the governor's original numbers, those $30-some-odd thousand in expense reductions were made as part of the recommendation for that first budget pass. So those are in there.
I think it's also important to note, we haven't heard back from the schools yet. If we think we're making tough decisions, I can assure you our colleagues at the schools are facing equally tough decisions there. So it's not any one department that's having to deal with all of this. And I certainly empathize with what our DPW director is saying, but it's tough on all of us.
Well, Madam Chair, I also would like to acknowledge that Mr. McKay's statement is accurate. I mean, if this budget is adopted for the DPW of $1.008 million, that's about as I see the numbers from 20, that's an $8,000 year-over-year reduction in the budget. It's not a lot, but I mean, it is a reduction. So I think that's important for folks to understand, and I agree with Mr. McKay. What I think is incumbent upon the board in these discussions, as well as the Finance Committee and others, for people to understand what the implications are. What will happen to services if we adopt this budget? I mean, that's part of the education process. So I agree it is accurate to say that this budget would be not a level service budget, a level funded budget for the DPW in particular. Now, that doesn't discuss the enterprises, but that's what general fund cost would be.
So I'm looking at the clock, and my question to the town administrator is, I've written down 3 items based on these top line comments, which may be a level of detail to be addressed later, but one was the potential to put back the DPW radios in some fashion or other. One was to reduce town council as a budgeted line item by 10%, consistent with the other cuts across the board. And one was to come back potentially with specific items pertaining to the DPW summer help, which looks like by attrition of a candidate has already been reduced by 50% as a recommended cost. Am I correct in that understanding, Mr. McKay?
That's correct, and it goes that's also for the remainder of this summer season and into the spring of next year till June. So that's how it's split. So yes, it would be we'd go with the one person and.
So what I would propose to my colleagues is that we provide some general direction, whether it's through a motion or just general sentiment, with respect to the budget has been laid out in these top line items, so that he has some structure to go into the Finance Committee meeting on Wednesday, unless people feel that that procedurally would be out of order, because I do want to give him time to just walk through, for the first time, the town meeting warrant as it's currently been presented to us.
Madam Chair, before we get to the warrant, I do want to have an opportunity to talk, I hope, about the enterprise funds.
You're welcome to do that. I am shooting for a 7:30 end, so we'll either get to the town meeting warrant or we'll do that on June 1st. So you have the floor.
Madam Chair, with all due respect, I mean, this is the job that we are elected to do, and to try to have a conversation and punt on the town warrant, I think is totally unacceptable.
I don't want to punt on the town meeting warrant, but I personally have a work call, which I knew last week, so I have to vacate myself. I'm happy to do that and let you guys carry on from here, but I think everybody, what I want to do is make sure we have really good, clear thinking, and what I've been hearing back, and I know what I've been experiencing myself, is that the volume of meetings has been really high, and so what I want to do is to provide some structure so that the town administrator can get the feedback that he needs, and we can make the decisions efficiently and manage meeting time at the same time.
Well, I'd just like to state that the notion that we don't get to one of these things and then we don't meet till June is not the way we should operate. We need to get these things done. We need to get them done sooner rather than later. The other boards can only react to them once we present it to them. So I am troubled by the notion that we're going to not be able to go through the budget.
Oh, noted. Well, we're not going to not go through the budget. Mr. Germain, did you want to talk specifically to the enterprise funds?
If we're going to talk about it, I guess my first comment would be, do either you or Mr. McCaffrey have any comments you'd like to make about the enterprise funds?
The only thing that I would say is that I raised the specter of whether or not, again, in an overall cost savings effort, we could look at, and it probably requires a warrant article to do so, is instead of having a once a year, end of the year bill for stormwater, if we could divide that up, as I've heard from many taxpayers they would like, and have it be an enterprise bill so that a homeowner receives whatever applies to them, water, sewer, stormwater. Stormwater is a fixed amount that is known year to year, so that would be an easy thing to carve up. That was part and parcel with also consider switching either outsourcing the billing process so that the automated meter readings feed right into a payroll or a bill paying system like an ADT. But to reduce the manual cost, to reduce the use of paper, to reduce the use of postage with an opt-in e-billing process. And I think what we would be doing is we would be hearing the taxpayers in terms of the negative feedback to a year-end, once-a-year bill, which for some homeowners is sizable heading into the end of the year, which is tough, especially this year. And also it would reduce our postage and materials costs as well as manual labor stuffing envelopes. Because it would be much more automated. That would be my comment for enterprise.
Okay. I have a couple of comments that I'd like to make and maybe a couple of recommendations to go along with it. With respect to water and sewer, we presently have a fairly substantial reserve fund. And in fact, we heard from Bernie, among others, that it's sizable and probably larger than it needs to be at this stage. To that end, I would like to suggest that maybe we can reduce the levy on the taxpayers for those funds in this coming fiscal year. I'd like that to be looked at. I think, Mr. Kaczynski, you and I did discuss this a little bit. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that and see what effect that might have if we could reduce it by some amount to make a little less burden on the taxpayers who pay into those funds. But that would be, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I actually haven't as of yet, but it's something the board wants me to look into. I can meet with the DPW director and we can review it and discuss different scenarios and implications on the rates and the ratepayers and what it would do to the reserves, if that's a policy that the board wants to look into.
I realize it's not going to reduce or change our burden in dealing with the immediate budget that we're talking with, but it is potential for a little relief to some of the taxpayers in that regard, if we can work it in a reasonable fashion. And a corollary to that would be the MS4. And again, these are areas where we might consider, yes, we know we have employees who are paid out of these enterprise funds. Certainly we want to cover them, but in the case of MS4, maybe we put off doing a number of things. We still keep the employees there. But again, if we can reduce for a year the amount of the levy to them, it does represent a potential savings in tax dollars to them in what they're going to pay to the town. I'm just looking at possible ways that we can help the taxpayers, at least in those areas, a little bit throughout the town. It may not be a lot, but it's something in the correct direction.
Mr. Kaczynski?
Again, it's something that if the board was interested in looking at that, we certainly could. We haven't had the opportunity to spend a lot of time on that end of the budget because we've been focusing on the general fund implications. But if the board was so inclined to want to take a look at that, I'd be happy to sit down with the DPW director and the finance director and look at the budget and see if there are areas that we could adjust. There are ramifications to any type of change we do, but like anything else, there are pros and cons that the board would have to consider about making any type of adjustment.
Madam Chair, if I could just quickly, 2 sentences. We're in the middle of the rate study. It's been completed. So when we have the rate study for the water and sewer, that's almost ready for the board, probably at the next meeting or after that. We haven't had a sewer increase in the past 3 years. The water increase last year was 5%. And the only funding that we're looking for, in the meaning for the large surplus of money, it was for the DPW building. That's been an ongoing project for 3 years in the funding aspect of it. And the more and more that we save, the less of the $1.3 million for both the water and sewer would have to be borrowed over a 20, 30-year loan payment. So that's why there's such a large surplus. It was always built in, and the board had voted for that so that we could build up the funds to pay for whether the board will make that decision. Either we're going to use those funds to not borrow the money and pay it off, or we're going to use the funds to, we can lower the rates, and then next year, maybe the following year when the bill, when the bid goes out and the money has to be paid, then we'll have to, put that in for a 30-year borrowing for both water and sewer. Stormwater is on its 3rd year of a no increase that the board had voted in, and that's still, so there is no increase projected for the stormwater. We put off the capital planning of the work till maybe November or the following year. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
in terms of this item on the enterprises, I think that the issue really is that I believe you're raising, Mr. Germain, is what are we going to charge for the product next year? And what we charge is based upon expectations of cost and development of a reserve for things like capital and unexpected costs. So I think that if we're going to provide this is basically rate relief. And I suppose there's a number of ways to do it. It's clear that under the rules relating to enterprise funds, the enterprise fund does not have to be fully funded by fees. They can get money from the taxpayers directly. We've chosen from a policy point of view to cover the costs using the fee basis. And of course, we are now going through a process of determining whether we're actually calculating the costs in a rational and equitable manner. So I think that to consider this, and there's 2 elements to it. One element is the revenue side, and the other element is that the revenues decline through, our decision does that mean that we have to reduce the expenditures as well? Or can we utilize, in somewhat of an indirect way, I suppose, some of the reserve? And I'm certainly more than happy to have somebody propose something that's reasonable in terms of that. I mean, I think that if we do that, whatever rate relief we decide we're going to use, I'd really like to see it targeted to the, the small homeowner. In other words, the first tier of cost. And I'm not trying to discriminate against anybody, but to me, the relief from a policy point of view ought to go to those who can least afford it. And I think that may be a way to take a look at that. But again, I think that comes through the rate hearing, because we have the authority and the discretion to charge the rates. What we can't do is charge rates higher than the cost of the enterprise. We certainly don't have to charge them the full cost in any 1 year. So I think it's something that we should take a look at, but we have to take a look at some of the detail to determine how we're going to implement. You had mentioned something about the compliance they asked for. The other side of this conversation is whether or not there are some services that we don't provide. I don't know. I mean, I think this is an important item to be discussed and provide some interesting opportunities for us.
Mr. McKay, did you say that the consultant study is due on the rates is due by June 1st?
Yes, it's complete. He sent it through his QC people to take a look at it. It's completely done.
And does it anticipate the increased cost for by the Charles River Pollution Control District and any other regulatory frameworks for our continued access to these systems?
Sure. So what he's looking at is the budget, the both water and sewer budgets, and the only capital increase would be for the Suez tank. That was built into the budget. It was never told to me by the town administrator that there was any change in any of that. I just took the direction from the town administrator to move forward with those.
And one of the things that's actually on the docket for this board is to discuss whether or not we should be changing the bylaw with respect to mandatory sewer hookups, which would also, I think, change the spread of the formula, correct?
Yes,
By
it could.
including the participants.
It could, yes.
So are there other comments or questions specific to the budget at this time?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yep.
I was continuing down to the next line item, A. My understanding is that we've already heard from the town administrator that the Council on Aging is intending to comply with the reduction by eliminating a position and having the senior center open for 8 hours a day, 4 days a week. My understanding is that the least populated day is Friday, so I think it's a very good recommendation on part of the director. And the other line items after that, I understand these pretty clearly, and I suppose there was a drum roll out there as to where I thought we could spend the $9,000 I cut out of town council. As far as I'm concerned, I would like to give serious consideration to directing that money to the library. I think we can find a way to keep the library open as much as possible, given the hope that in one of the phases of this rollout that the library will be able to open, because it is addressed in the governor's guidelines. And I'd hate to have it rolled out as now being able to open the library to our citizens, only to find that it's not open as much as they thought it would be.
Mr. Kaczynski?
That's certainly doable. I mean, I don't have any issue with the reduction of the town council, as I had stated earlier, so that if the boards wish to put it towards the library, that certainly makes sense, if that's a priority of the board, so.
My understanding is that, Mr. Kaczynski, you're going to ask us to approve money to support the Recreation Department right now, correct?
That is going to be a reserve fund transfer for the Finance Committee on Wednesday. That's part of, again, as I mentioned, the Recreation Department has not been able to collect fees on certain programs in the spring, and that has put a stretch on that department. And there'll be a number of interdepartmental transfers for the board, either at your meeting on June 1st or June 15th. However, the Recreation Department transfer is needed before that, and that's why it's being requested as a reserve fund transfer. So, again, I just wanted to make the board aware that that's one of the many transfers we'll be looking at prior to the end of the fiscal year. This is just happens to be the first one we'll be seeking.
And does that need to be done this evening or no?
No formal vote of the board is needed, although I'm certainly happy to answer questions of the board members. It's a $12,000 reserve fund request. I do expect between now and the end of June, we'll be doing about $200,000 worth of interdepartmental transfers, which is a pretty common thing for the town at the end of the year to deal with issues of different departments. The finance director and I have spent considerable time looking at the transfers, and there are funds available to do it. I'd expect within the next week or so, we'll be able to forward an outline of those transfers to the select board for your review in time for your next regular meeting.
I've just rolled up, assuming that we looked at the Recreation Historical Oak Grove Farm, which is, I think, largely a volunteer organization that plays a role in our rotation and access to fields. So I think I am on the last formal page of the budget, unless anybody has any other comments or wants to go backward.
I have one comment I'd like to make, if I may, please.
Please.
As I know we're going to discuss this in a few moments, and that's the money we got, I believe it's out of the CARES Act. And the problem is there are a lot of caveats associated with that. At some point, I would like to see that we very quickly look at how that might be able to impact our budget. I don't believe we can do anything with it prior to town meeting. There's just too much to go through, too many ifs, whens, and so on. But I will say, looking at it, I think that we have some options coming up that may help us with our budget in the not-too-distant future. I just point that out, not that, again, we can change our budget at this point. I don't think we can. But I think before everybody looks at it and thinks it's total doom and gloom, yeah, it's tough. But I think there's a little bit of optimism in that, and that's just my view of it at this moment.
And, Madam Chair, that was the last item I was going to bring up under the budget was the CARES Act. We have been notified through the state and Rep. Linsky's office that Millis is eligible for $729,147 in CARES Act funds. As Selectman Germain stated, there's a large but in there, in that at this point, based on the language from Congress in the CARES Act, all the funds used by the town have to be directly related in some form or fashion to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so that's something we'll be looking at carefully. There's always the chance that the Congress may change those rules over time. That's something we're going to keep an eye on. I know Congress is looking at other bills, but this one is the one that it actually passed. We will certainly try to make best use of whatever funds that we can utilize from this allotment. And it'll be several months before we know in more detail whether or not there'll be more expansive uses for which we can put these funds to work for the community. There's a press on to allow communities to use this for lost revenue as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and those discussions are ongoing. So I would not advise counting on these funds for next year's budget at this time, but there is hope that things may evolve and change that may allow that down the road.
And one of the things that might count would be the increased cost of to staff the Board of Health, that it's been doing yeoman's work 24/7 and will continue to be with the reopening edicts.
It certainly has.
So I guess I would go back, we're on this last page of this budget, the top line budget. Mr. Kaczynski, can you just explain, and in particular, note the the yellow highlight?
Actually, Carol, did you want to talk about that a little bit on the last page of the budget?
Yes, I did. Sorry, I didn't. I had to dial back in. So on that 353,209.85, that's the original amount for the 35-65 split for the town for the new revenues for this year. So that was the amount that we were allowed to increase. You can see that we had to reduce our original budget that came over. So that was our split. Now of that split, we had at the balanced budget portion, we had 56,705 that we left there in case they decided not to fund the signals for in place of the traffic crossing guards. We'd have to put the 52,000 back for the traffic guards. And then if you do go forward with the 40,000 for the signals, then we would add it to a line underneath the revenues here to reduce to 40,000. But if we don't get the signals, we have to put the traffic police officers back in.
Any of my colleagues have questions about that? I am going to ask anybody from the community. If they do not, does anybody have any questions for the town administrator, the director of finance, or the board?
Lauren Craig is raising his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Craig Schultz, please, member of the finance committee.
Just a quick question, Carol. That $50,000, $50,719.73 that you're showing at the bottom line. Would that be able to go into free cash to purchase the signals if we don't fund the crossing guards? Is that the way I'm reading this, or is that not the case?
So right. So what would I do? I do is see where it says revenue adjustments. I'd add another line in there.
Yep.
And then the 40,000 in there, so we'll reduce it. Then we'd have 10,000 extra, and that way you'd have an article that would address that 40,000
For the traffic signals.
for the traffic signals. Right.
So the budget as presented would either contemplate traffic signals or crossing guards.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And then my only other question briefly is, I'm not super familiar with unemployment laws, but if we cut the town hall staff by 10%, so in other words, remove 10% of their hours, does that make those that are cut eligible for unemployment or not?
It does not. It does not. We've checked with town labor council. The trigger point is a 20% reduction in hours. Trigger point for unemployment.
So my question would only be, and I'm only thinking of what would be best for employees, or just put it out there as an idea, I guess. Is a larger cut to fewer people that would make them unemployment eligible less impactful than a small cut to everybody who would not be eligible for employment? So in other words, we're going to knock 102,000 off of a lot of people's salaries, not any one person, but spread out. Is that more or less impactful, just for consideration, than one or two positions where they would be able to go on unemployment and possibly pick up the extra COVID bonus unemployment number also now? It doesn't need an answer. It's just something to think about.
Yeah, I can speak for my staff in the finance department. It would be more harmful. We don't have a department where we could eliminate a position, even as reducing by the 10%. Going with the closing the town hall to the public on Wednesdays, it's still going to be a stretch for us to get the work done.
Right.
And some things may have to be delayed, but it would not be better for my department to do that.
I was just trying to put it out there as a consideration, because we've had that same debate at our place of employment, our employees, whether it's better to get people unemployment eligible or force large or small cuts on a lot of people.
Right.
Any other comments or questions about the budget as being presented? I think about 3 weeks ago, the select board had a vigorous and open discussion with community input, subject expert input, and rendered a decision in the majority to direct the town administrator to establish this budget framework with the 5% across the board cuts realized against achieved against increased costs and expenses, and that is what has been presented to us both technically as well as philosophically. And I'm wondering if my colleagues feel comfortable in saying that this is the direction that we want him to continue to go in, as would continue the conversation with FinCom.
I am comfortable with that, with the adjustments that we had discussed, at least from my perspective, in terms of the town council and the change for the library appropriation. I think that, from my perspective, the budget we have here calls for eliminating the crossing guards. And I'm willing to support that, at least tentatively, but I would like to have a more specific transition plan as to who's going to be helping the students in the early part of the year, acclimate to the new crossing signals. But I do feel it's important for us this time to give the finance committee and the citizens of the town at least our best guess as of May 18th, knowing that things are still a little fluid, and if anything changes significantly, then we'd have to sort of make adjustments. But we've been known to do that right to the very end, and hopefully we're in a pretty good situation now where we have a definite proposal.
I'm sorry, Mr. Germain, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think it was summarized just fine by Mr. McCaffrey. I don't want to add more words than are necessary.
I'm happy to pull the board I'm happy to entertain a motion.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Move that the board adopt this proposed budget as its budget for FY21 with the adjustments to town council and the library line item.
I'll second that with the clarifications that we asked for also.
Yeah, to that, I would just ask if we could amend it, Mr. McCaffrey, to also ask the question about the feasibility for funding the DPW radios, as well as more information about the impacts to the reduction of DPW summer help.
Well, the DPW radio, I'm fine with that, except that the DPW radio is not in this budget. It's a warrant article.
Right.
So I think when we take up the warrant article, we can
Got it.
Discuss our position with respect to the radios. And in terms of the summer help, whatever adjustment we think we could make, I would stand to have that motion amended.
I'm going to pull the board accordingly. Mr. McCaffrey?
Yes.
Mr. Germain?
Yes.
Ms. Barnes, yes. So more information to follow, but now the town administrator and the town at large have heard from the select board on the important matter of belt tightening for fiscal year 21. With that, I would like to ask the town administrator if you could walk through the preliminary draft of the town meeting warrant.
I'd also like to comment, Madam Chair,
Yep.
that I hope people understand we're not thrilled with having to put together a budget with this kind of a cut in it, but prudence does dictate, and that's how we're moving forward.
Mr. Kaczynski.
Madam Chair, so I will go through the articles one by one. Some I'll go through by rather quickly since they're standard articles that appear every year. But feel free to stop me if there are any questions on the articles. We do at this time have on the draft town meeting warrant have 27 articles. Article 1 is a standard article we do every year, is unpaid bills. We have a total of $1,056.32 in prior year unpaid bills. Article 2 is the article for transfers within the current fiscal year for wages and expenses in regards to balancing out the end of the fiscal year 20 budget. And again, we'll have information on that within the next week to week and a half. Article 3 is our omnibus budget for the town, which we just went through. Articles 4, 5, and 6 are our enterprise budgets. Article 7 is for the amendments to the Millis Personnel Plan, which is done every year at town meeting. Again, in your packet was a recommended amendment list to the personnel plan. Article 8 is for an independent audit, again, a standard article. Article 9, authorize the Board of Health to appoint any of its members to another town office or position for which it has appointing authority. Again, a standard article. Article 10 is the authorization of revolving funds, which must be done annually. And I will note to the board that I've had some discussion with town council about the possibility of having a collected article for a consent of several of the standard articles. And it's something that I've had a conversation with the town council about, and that would be a subject of a future discussion, but might allow for a more streamlined town meeting. But I just wanted to bring that up to the board. Article 11, that is the article from the Capital Planning Committee. It lists the proposed items from the Capital Committee, which include some prior year committed items for leases. The first being the school department with a committed bus lease of $89,999. Then the police with a committed police cruiser lease, $31,913. And the police, this is the new item, crosswalk signals, actually 4 sets of signals for a total of $40,000. Then the Water Enterprise Fund for drinking water risk and resilience assessment at $40,000. And then another one, the Water Enterprise Fund Water Tanks Assessment Management Program, which was discussed a little bit earlier. This would be for year 1 of the 15-year program of $199,921 for a total capital item of $401,833. And again, the first 3 would be paid for through a combination of free cash and raise and appropriate, and the last 2 listed would be from the Water Enterprise Fund. Any questions on that particular article?
Like anything, the devil's in the details, but...
Absolutely. Article 12 is actually another capital item, but since it's a new lease, it's been recommended by town council that any new leases be a separate article, as they require a 2/3 vote at town meeting. And this is for $71,106 for the lease purchase of computers for the school department. Article 13 is, Carol, did you want to talk for a moment? Excuse me.
May I interrupt for 1 second? Do
Yes.
we not have a lease already in place for the school computers, or are we setting up a separate one, and perhaps somebody like Craig can answer that? I just don't remember the details. I thought we had a lease.
We currently have 3 leases for computers over at the school, totaling the $71,000. One lease ends in FY20, so there'll be a new lease starting for FY21.
Okay. Should they not have also been in Article 11? I'm just trying to understand why this shows up separately.
Because one of the computer leases is finishing in FY20, so they'll need a they'll need a new lease for that portion of the computers over there for FY21.
There are no other computers under lease at this time?
So they have 3 leases.
Right.
All of them are around $23,000 apiece. 2 finish, and then the third one is up for renewal. So the total of the 3 would be the $71,106.
Okay, I guess what I'm saying is if we're putting in Article 11, school buses and other leases like that, why are not the ones that are still not up for renewal in the Article 11?
This was the recommended approach by town council, but I'm sure that if there was a concern about the transparency of what's occurring here, it is within the board's authority to change how this is presented. So if you would like a separate computer item within Article 11 for the currently approved leases, we could do that and then have a separate item just for the new lease. I think either way there might be a little confusion, and I understand that, but it's really up to the board to determine if you think there's a better way to present that to the public, that there is some leeway to make some changes there.
I would just like to ensure that we are clear that there is one lease that's still in force and that there are 2 that what they're looking for are new leases. And yes, they may add up in total to 71,000, but we ought to, as a community, be aware of what the status of all 3 leases are and why we're coming up with 71,000. That's my view, my opinion. That's the way I look at it.
I would defer to you as the technology expert.
Madam Chair, I might,
Sure.
to address Mr. Tremaine, there was discussion of these items, particularly the one on the capital item, at the Capital Planning Committee. And I think that although we did not take a formal vote or anything, there was sentiment in the Capital Planning Committee that these leases are really operating expenses. That in order for the school to maintain the computer capability it needs, it should incorporate this into the operating budget rather than having it come up as a separate capital item. Now that's, again, this is the committee's conversation, didn't take any action on it. Because we were trying to, adopt a capital warrant article.
I have no problem with the concept. Under those conditions, though, I think perhaps Article 12, if it were segmented a little differently so we could understand in Article 12 then that one lease is ongoing at least for 1 more year and that they're looking for an additional number of items in new leases for this year, it would help to clarify what Article 12 is all about. It's not just 71,000. Basically, and this is again my interpretation, we have an obligation for an existing lease, which we understand is one of the 3 leases. So that's really non-negotiable, but we all ought to know what that is. And then any additional need for computers needs to be identified and what the cost is going to be, the terms, and so on. At least that's my view. And I think that's something that in the past, even on the FinCom, I used to ask for clarity on.
So, as I mentioned, it's certainly, if the board would like, I can work to split these items out, and we could put the committed computer leases in Article 11 and put the new lease in Article 12. And if the board feels that provides a clearer picture for the community, I believe we can do that. So I can just confirm that with town council tomorrow.
I'm not suggesting they have to go into Article 11. I'm saying you could put it all in Article 12 for all I care. What I'm concerned with is that we identify what's exactly being talked about in the 71,000.
Okay, so we can break up the language into 2 parts and then 1 total? Is that what you're...
Yeah, so that we understand what they're voting on, or have an opportunity to vote on, and what we're all looking at is one lease that has a year to go, and basically we have to fund it, and that's X amount. And then we're looking at an additional number of computers that are going to cost so much over so many years in a lease, and here's what they're for. That's all I'm looking for.
I have a question relative to the capital planning committee's assessment that in fact, these may in fact be operating costs. Is there a strategic direction that this board wants to ask of the school committee in the development of their budget to make sure that capital costs are truly that versus operating costs that are being presented to the taxpayer as additional line items? Hearing none, I will assume none, but it was the capital planning committee that sounded like they had identified that as a possible budget tool.
Madam Chair, if I may, just quickly, I mean, I think the capital committee has had a great deal of discussion about determining what really is an appropriate capital versus operational issue, and they have identified that as an issue that the town needs to work upon to resolve and clarify for future years. But at this point, because of the situation we're in and other constraints, I think it was felt that this was not the year to make those changes, but they did recognize that as an issue that needed further discussion of the committee and corrective action over time.
Mr. McCaffrey, does that sound consistent with your takeaway?
Madam Chair, yes, I think that was basically the position. And, the full story, of course, would be that if we decided as a town in the subsequent year that we wanted to incorporate this kind of thing into operating budget, it would be the same thing happen on the municipal side as happens on the education side, that we make an operating budget adjustment in the first year. So it's not just transferring costs, but it's transferring the required revenue so that the operating budget would include those. But I think that certainly it's fair to say that Mr. Gazinski's description is correct. This is not the only item that the committee has struggled with a little bit in terms of what's capital. So I think you can find that the committee will be coming forward in the future with other thoughts on what ought to be incorporated into operations versus true capital expenditure.
Assuming nobody else has any other comments on this, I think that brings us to Article number 13. Mr. Gazinski?
Carol, did you want to talk about what the effect of this article is and what it would accomplish?
Sure. So Article 13, there are three current DPW capital items that had previously been funded. Right now, they are complete and have
Carol,
a balance.
I'm sorry. Carol, your audio cut out. Could you just repeat that question? I'm sorry, that statement just from the beginning. Sorry.
Okay. Article 13 is there are town projects for DPW that have unexpended money in it, approximately $121,000, I believe, in these three projects. But what this article is asking is that we take those three remaining funds and transfer them so that we can use those funds to pay a portion of the new DPW facility, part of the construction, renovation, and remodeling project, and thereby reduce our borrowing.
Okay. Any questions about that? Hearing none. Number 14.
Yes, Article 14. This article is in connection with the capital article for $199,000. This would authorize the select board to enter into a contract for a period of up to 20 years for the purpose of inspecting, maintaining, repairing, modifying, and providing asset management services for the town's water tanks at Farm Street and Walnut Street on terms and conditions the board deems to be in the best interest of the town. So because this would be an agreement for over 3 years, this requires approval of the legislative body, and this would authorize, but not direct, the select board to enter into an agreement for up to 20 years for those management services. And again, in Article, I believe 11, it outlined the first year cost of that agreement.
Yep.
Article 15, that's the annual community preservation fund, and it lists out the different appropriations and reserves associated with those accounts. Again, that's a fairly standard article. Article 16, again with the Community Preservation Historic Resource Reserve Fund for the preservation and rehab of the Henry F. Walling map. I cannot speak in detail to that, but I'm sure if the board would like someone from that board to come speak to you about it, they certainly would be willing to. Article 17 is again the Community Preservation Fund for a Memorial Day Fields improvements project. I believe parts of this have become before the board earlier in the year in regards to some proposals for improvements in the playing fields near the schools and the VMB. I don't know if there are any questions or comments on that.
Yeah, I attended this last CPC meeting, and I guess what I would say is that the next step in this process appears to be the confirmation of, if you can imagine a pie in which there are multiple pieces. I think there are 6 contributing sources of funds to address fields improvements and safety improvements rendered by the proximity of these town ball fields adjacent to the school, the new 2 new school playgrounds. So there just needs to be a consensus that the money is in fact available, that it's fully documented. There's a couple that I think are by legislative action. And so we just need to make sure that all of the ducks are in a row, so to speak, so that the project can move forward and that everybody who is a user is participating in the planning, the use, and perhaps the continued funding, which right now is, I believe, the operational funding and maintenance is 100% borne by the DPW, which is taking a big hit in terms of resources. So that may be something that needs to be looked at. Mowing being on the chopping block, so to speak.
So, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask that the Finance Director discuss the next 4 articles, if she'd be so inclined. And I don't know if the assessor is online as well, but I know some of these certainly involve the assessing office.
Right. So Article 18 is to raise and appropriate the funds $15,600 for fiscal year 2021 personal property interim year inspections and real estate interim year evaluations. Article 19 is...
Can you just go back to that, Carol, to explain what that means to the town? That the town taxpayer would say that it was a big shock to get not only the bill for the school, which obviously was approved by town meeting, but then on top of it to have a market-corrected assessment. So can you just explain, to set the expectation for the town and for property owners, what this means for their property assessments?
Sure.
And the time frame.
This is done. This is something that's done every year and has been done every year in the town of Millis. It is to be able to go out and get the full and fair value of properties in the town to make sure that everyone is equitably paying their fair share of the taxes for the town. This is something that personal property is interim year inspections go on, and also the real estate year revaluations. It's just a matter of they go out and they review the properties, not every single property in town, but the assessors have to go out and inspect every property once every 10 years. And in order to do that, they need to have these interim year inspections done. Article 19 is to see if the town will vote to decrease the age requirement for the that's applicable July 1st, reduce it from age 70 to age 65. That is to hopefully be able to have more people eligible for the senior tax exemption, clause 41C under chapter 184, subsection 51 of the Acts of 2002. Article 20 is to see if the town will vote to increase the gross receipts that the seniors may have in a prior calendar year to be eligible to defer property taxes under Mass General Law, Chapter 59, subsection 5, clause 41A, Acts of 2005, from 20,000 to 40,000, and then such increase to be effective for tax deferrals granted for any fiscal year beginning on or after July 1st, 2020. Right now, the town does not have any people deferring their taxes, any seniors. This may enable people to help if they feel they qualify. Article 21 is to see if the town of Millis will vote to increase the value of the whole estate, excluding the value of the domicile, available to surviving spouse, minor child, elderly person owning real property pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 59, subsection 5, Clause 17D, by approving to increase the whole estate value by the Consumer Price Index with the Department of Revenue to inform the town annually with the amount of the increase beginning with fiscal year 2021. Right now we have three residents that qualify for the 17D exclusion.
Mr. Kaczynski, any questions on these? This is an expansion. This is the benefit of having a new town assessor in part as part of the finance department, and is intended to provide both expanded relief and subsidy opportunity for qualifying seniors.
All right, Madam Chair, Article 22, which would amend Article 1, Section 1 of the town's general bylaws by deleting the first sentence and replacing it with the following. The annual town meeting for the transaction of business will be held on the first Monday of May, and the annual meeting for the election of officers and such other matters as may be voted on the official ballot will be held on the second Monday of May. So currently, as everyone's aware, the town election takes place a week before the town meeting. And certainly there are drawbacks to that, as I know the board has discussed. In the majority of communities, it is the opposite order, where the town meeting occurs and then shortly after the town election would occur. So this would change the order of those two events for the town, and I think provide a smoother functioning town meeting and town election. So that Article 22 would accomplish that.
And the balance?
Madam Chair? Yes, this is Lisa.
Yep.
Yes. May I speak regarding that general bylaw change?
Yes.
I would, since this wouldn't go into effect for another year, I would like to suggest that this be put off to the November town meeting. I think it's not a good idea for the town meeting to be making changes to the bylaws this year under the current conditions, when it is very difficult to size changes that are being made. And this particular one, that the town has operated under this bylaw for 130 years, and while that's not a reason not to change it, I think it is a reason to make sure that there is adequate public hearings to find out what people think about this action. And my other comment is that the second sentence in that same article refers to the town meeting, which is held the first Monday in November. And it would be helpful if we're going to change dates of town meetings that we address that one also, because every other year it is the night before a state election, which is very difficult for election workers in my office. So I would just ask that the select board consider putting this particular bylaw change off till November, but I don't expect you to decide tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaczynski, item 23.
Madam Chair, this was part of the sewer connection bylaw. It was coming out of a series of discussions the board held back in the fall and over the winter in regards to the town approaching its cap on sewer with the Charles River Pollution Control District. This item was put together by town council a while back in response to some of that discussion, and this would require property owners who are entitled to a sewer connection to connect within a certain period of time or face a fine per day in relation to that. There would be a number of exemptions, and it also would instruct the sewer commissioners to adopt regulations for the implementation of the bylaw. So it's put on there for the board's consideration at this time, and to determine whether or not it's something the board wants to move forward with.
Item 24? I think the next of these, the next four are fairly straightforward.
Yeah, Articles 24, 25, 26, and 27 are fairly standard articles. Article 24 is the standard Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement services. The town usually gains a lot more back in the reimbursements than it costs to administer the program. Article 25 is a request for $75,000 for the unemployment insurance fund. We do have to raise funds in that item on a fairly regular basis. Article 26 is the other post-employment benefits fund, and Article 27 is the stabilization fund. In light of the stresses the town is going through this year, it's unlikely that any funds would go into those accounts, and at this time there are no funds recommended to be deposited into those two accounts at this town meeting. So that is the complete draft warrant, Madam Chair.
Excellent. So now that that draft and these various budget documents will in fact be posted to the town website, where they can be considered by the community as well as members of this board as a first cut. There is a lot of work to be done on the budget. The next step of which is to move to the discussions with FinCom. They now have heard from this board probably earlier than they have in a long time. So they're going to render their final decisions by June 10th, and we'll have an opportunity to discuss those as a community and as a board going forward. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues at this point?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I do think that taking up on the comment from the town clerk, we might want to give some thought to the two bylaw articles, that the timing of them is potentially problematic due to the conditions we're in. And I believe we had a memo from the town administrator indicating that the Division of Local Services folks at the state level are encouraging towns to have an expedited warrant for the spring, largely dealing with financial issues. So I think we should give serious consideration when we finalize the warrant to eliminating those two bylaw requests, and also, figuring out the bus lease issue. Are we going to put it in one article or another? And I know we don't have to adopt it tonight, but I just think we ought to give that serious consideration.
Point well taken. I'll say, for my opinion on the on switching the sequence of the election and the town meeting, I thought that there was a really rational reason for doing that, and that is that the town meeting is therefore represented by the leadership team that really developed the budget, and that we eliminate the newcomers who really weren't part of its architecture to be seated in front of the community in whatever format that now takes going forward, to be able to represent it, and then finally to be able to have a stronger window of time for training, so that if in fact you have a new moderator and a new team, they've had the opportunity to be have more training going into meetings going forward. So anyhow, point well definitely take those up now that the plate has been set, so to speak, so now we know kind of where we're headed. What I'd like to propose is that we reconvene on Monday, June 1st, which allows everybody for a well-deserved break next week for hopefully some allowed by the state outdoor enjoyment of public parks and beaches if the weather holds. And it will also give the various contributing boards, specifically the school committee and finance committee, the opportunity to take up the conversation from here before we get deeply immersed in it. Although those, I believe the finance committee is in fact co-posted so that if the full complement or quorum from this board wants to attend, they can do so without limitation. Are there any other comments? Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate your accommodating this evening one of the crankiest old men in town.
I've been texted by so many people who are mad at me because I'm not in a meeting in California, so yeah.
I hope they're doing well out there too. I agree, except for to ask the finance committee to deliberate over a warrant article that we ultimately don't even propose. I think that's not a reasonable thing for us to ask them to do. I mean, it could be as simple as taking a motion right now to recommend this is the preliminary warrant, so at least that we're on record.
I'm happy for you to make a motion to that effect.
The motion is not exactly, my motion would be to propose the warrant with the exclusion of the two bylaw articles, just simply because at this point in time, I think the timing isn't great, but that would be my motion.
I would prefer to keep the two bylaw, well, at least number 23 in at this time. And I don't see any problem at the moment of keeping 22, although I understand the concerns that have been raised. I just assume keep them in for the purposes of some further discussion, and then at a future meeting we can deal with them further. But it gives everybody, including the Finance Committee, an opportunity to further discuss and refine the thinking behind these articles. I'd like to hear, to be honest, what they have to say in addition to what the town clerk and our own thoughts are.
I actually think there's no harm, no foul in that approach, Mr. Germain, that at least it says to the town, we're thinking of these issues too. They have operational and also financial implications. These weren't things that we kind of took out of the air. They were comments and ideas that have been percolating for some time. So I'm comfortable with this being a preliminary warrant to indicate the opportunity for further conversation on both.
Does that mean there's no second? My motion.
Second.
Fails for one second.
Second, with respect to making the amendments that I just said, keeping both of those in for the time being.
It's been moved and seconded for the select board to adopt this as a draft preliminary warrant so that it is in its totality the basis of further conversation and budgetary and policy deliberations across various town boards. I will poll the board. Mr. McCaffrey?
I will vote yes.
Mr. Germain?
Yes.
Ms. Barnes, yes. Very efficient meeting, my friends. Moved and passed. Yes?
I would like to, if you will let me, just one moment discuss the CARES Act, which came at the very end here. If nothing else, it's very complicated because of the way in which the funds are likely to be distributed. I'd like to offer that we have a quick task force put together to review this and come back with some recommendations post haste, if that's acceptable to you, Madam Chair, and also my colleague, Mr. McCaffrey. And I don't care, if one of you wants.
If you would like to spearhead an inter-board effort, certainly the tri-board would want to weigh in, and I assume that the town administrator would want some people to weigh in. I think that's fine. I think anything that is prudent planning is advantageous.
Unless Mr. McCaffrey would prefer to do so. I don't want to take it away from the vice chair.
I think that we ought to delegate the quarterback for this ought to be the IT director?
I'm in total agreement because the vice chair is exhausted from the capital planning effort that has just been produced, which is years in the making.
Excuse me, Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'm not exhausted, but I'm perfectly willing to pass the buck.
I just want to make it known that the deadline for submitting this is June 5th.
Right.
So we can't delay on getting this in, and the sooner we get it in, the sooner we'll receive the funds, hopefully before June 30th.
So why don't we plan on the IT director being a quarterback for this effort, and then our meeting on June 1st, that you all will present the analysis of what you feel is eligible and worthy of submission.
Okay, I will move forward. Mr. Kaczynski, you and I have a little to talk about, and for some of you who are listening, I will be in touch with you very shortly.
And I would say this would be an appropriate ask to participants through the participants of the other boards. If anybody from the school committee or his finance committee is here, this would be a helpful message to take back. And specifically, Mr. Kaczynski, if you could communicate with department heads too, because they probably will have some ideas.
Absolutely.
That I would entertain a motion to recess, adjourn.
Yeah, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I think I'll do an all in favor. Say aye. Aye. Yes. Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Aye. Mr. Germain?
Aye.
Wishing everybody a safe, a healthy and safe and responsible, but well-deserved long weekend of only sunny weather and sunny days ahead. And I would just ask and reiterate that for any local employers and local businesses that are looking for how to adopt and effectuate the state reopening guidelines, please direct your attention to the town website, where there will be information on both the Board of Health page as well as the Economic Development Committee page. And the heads of those two functional areas are available to advise as they will be generating tools and information that pertains specifically to your successful and welcoming return to business. And with that, we look forward to seeing everybody on June 1st. And I want to wish my colleagues a very enjoyable long weekend with your families as well. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.